The first thing I noticed wasn't the flames, it was the lilacs.
Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, president of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association, had just spent 3 weeks demanding I remove the unsightly lilac bush by my front porch. Said it violated Section 4, subsection B of the HOA covenants. All ornamental flora must not exceed 18 inches in height without prior approval. My lilacs were 22 inches, 22, and apparently that was a capital offense in Oak Hollow. I remember standing on my porch that Tuesday evening, sipping lukewarm chamomile tea, watching her white Lexus glide past for the 3rd time that day. She didn't wave. She never did. But she slowed just enough for me to catch her glare in the rear view. Cold, calculating, like I'd personally offended her ancestors by letting a shrub breathe freely. Then came the smell. Not lilacs, smoke. At first I thought it was a neighbor grilling, but it was October. Too crisp for backyard barbecues. The scent thickened, acrid and wrong. I turned toward the garage and saw it. A thin, greasy plume curling from beneath the side door. My stomach dropped like a stone in a well. I ran inside, shouting for my dog, Max. The heat hit me before I even reached the kitchen. Flames licked up the drywall near the back door, fed by something oily. Gasoline, I'd later learn. The smoke alarm shrieked like a banshee. I grabbed Max, my laptop, and the fireproof box with my grandmother's letters and bolted out the front just as the windows exploded inward with a sound like thunder wrapped in glass. Fire trucks arrived in 6 minutes. By then my house, my home, the one I'd rebuilt after my divorce, the one where I'd painted every room myself, was a skeleton of ash and embers. Fire Chief Ruiz pulled me aside, soot streaking his brow. Arson, he said quietly. Accelerant used. Deliberate. I didn't have to guess who. 2 days later, I found a note tucked under what was left of my mailbox. Neat, cursive handwriting on cream-colored stationery. Some rules exist for a reason. Perhaps now you'll understand the value of order. Signed with a looping EW. I stood there in the rain, holding that note like it was evidence, which it was, and felt something colder than grief settle in my chest. Rage, yes, but also clarity. Because Eleanor Whitmore didn't just burn down my house. She thought she'd gotten away with it.
3 days after the fire, I sat in my car outside the Oak Hollow HOA clubhouse, engine off, hands gripping the wheel like I might strangle it. Rain tapped the roof in a steady rhythm, matching the pulse in my temples. I wasn't supposed to be here. Officially, I was on administrative leave from HOA Communications. Eleanor's polite way of saying I was persona non grata, until I processed my loss appropriately. But I'd received an email that morning, sent from the HOA's official account. Emergency compliance review. Your attendance required. 7 p.m., room B. No signature, no agenda. Just that sterile, bureaucratic tone they loved. I knew it was a trap. But I also knew Eleanor couldn't resist the theater of it all, cornering me in the very place she'd spent years weaponizing against her neighbors. So I went. The clubhouse was dim, lit only by the flickering fluorescence in the hallway. Room B, the grievance chamber, we used to joke, was empty except for her. She stood by the projector screen, back straight, hair in that perfect silver bob, wearing a cream cardigan like she was hosting a book club, not ambushing a grieving homeowner. "Daniel," she said, not turning. "You look unwell." "I lost everything," I said flatly. "But thanks for noticing." She finally faced me, eyes sharp as shattered glass. "This isn't about your house. It's about accountability. You've been spreading rumors, telling the fire marshal I had something to do with your misfortune. I told him you threatened me over a bush." "A violation," she corrected, voice tightening. "Repeated, willful non-compliance erodes community standards. You knew the rules, and now I know what you do to people who break them." She stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper that slithered down my spine. "Be careful what you accuse me of, Daniel. I have witnesses who saw you arguing with contractors the week before the fire. Financial records showing you were behind on your mortgage. And that little dog of yours? Very flammable." My blood turned to ice. Before I could respond, the door creaked open. 2 men in dark suits entered. Private security, badges clipped to their belts. "Ms. Whitmore asked us to escort you off the property," one said. I didn't move. "You really think burning my house down would make me back off?" Eleanor smiled, not a warm smile. The kind a spider gives a fly halfway through the web. I don't know what you're talking about. But if something else were to happen, well, who would believe you? As they led me out, I glanced back. On the table sat a manila folder labeled D. Mercer, Final Notice. And beside it, a lighter, silver, engraved with the initials E.W. I didn't sleep that night, not after seeing that lighter. Instead, I drove to the fire department's evidence storage unit, a cinderblock shed behind the station, and begged Chief Ruiz to let me see what they'd salvaged. He hesitated, arms crossed, rain dripping off his cap. You know I can't just hand over case files, Dan. I'm not asking for files, I said. I'm asking for one thing, one look. He studied me for a long moment, then sighed. 10 minutes, and you don't touch anything. Inside, the air smelled of wet ash and chemicals. My belongings, what little survived, were laid out on folding tables like museum exhibits of a life reduced to fragments. A melted coffee mug, my grandmother's locket, empty, Max's chewed-up tennis ball, blackened at the edges. Then I saw it, tucked in a sealed evidence bag, a half-burned gardening glove, not mine, too small. And on the cuff, faint but visible under the soot, a tiny embroidered logo. Oak Hollow HOA, property maintenance. My breath caught. Eleanor had worn those gloves at every community cleanup. I'd seen her snapping them on like surgical gloves before yanking weeds from the sidewalk median. Where was this found? I asked, voice tight. Near the back door, Ruiz said. Close to the point of origin. We ran prints. Partial match to Eleanor Whitmore. I stared at him. And? Nothing yet. She claims she lost a pair weeks ago. Says someone must have stolen them to frame her. He rubbed his temple. Without more, it's circumstantial. But I knew better. That night, I went back to the ruins of my house with a flashlight and a pair of tweezers. Kneeling in the mud, I sifted through debris near the garage, the spot where the accelerant had pooled. And there, wedged under a warped floorboard, I found it. A shard of glass from a broken bottle. Not just any bottle. A lilac-scented essential oil bottle. The same brand Eleanor used in her diffuser. She'd once complained at an HOA meeting that my cheap pine air freshener clashed with her aromatherapy standards. I bagged it carefully, hands shaking. The next morning, I called my old friend Lena, a forensic chemist. Can you test this for gasoline residue? Sure, she said, but why? Because I think the woman who burned my house down left her signature in the ashes. 2 days later, Lena called back. Gasoline, high octane, and traces of lilac oil. Same batch as the unburned bottle you sent. I hung up and stared out my motel window at the gray October sky. Eleanor hadn't just set the fire. She'd signed it. The warrant was served on a Thursday. I watched from across the street as 2 county deputies approached Eleanor's immaculate colonial. White shutters, manicured hedges, a "Bless this home" plaque that now felt like a sick joke. She was in her garden, pruning roses with surgical precision, when they called her name. She didn't drop the shears, didn't flinch, just turned slowly, like a queen interrupted during tea. May I ask what this is regarding? She said, voice smooth as marble. Arson, Ms. Whitmore, 1st degree, also threatening a witness. Her eyes flicked to me. I hadn't moved. Just stood there in my worn jacket. Max on a leash beside me, rain beginning to fall in cold, steady sheets. For the first time, I saw it. Fear. Not panic, not guilt. But the sharp, startled crack in her composure when she realized the script had flipped. She wasn't the enforcer anymore. She was the accused. They cuffed her right there, in front of the hydrangeas she'd once cited me for overwatering. At the arraignment, she pleaded not guilty. Her lawyer, a slick guy in a $3,000 suit, called the evidence coincidental and emotionally charged. But the judge wasn't buying it. The gardening glove, the lighter, the lilac-scented accelerant combo. It was too specific, too personal. Bail was set at $250,000. Eleanor posted it within hours. I knew she would. What I didn't expect was the voicemail she left me that night. Daniel, she purred, voice calm, almost tender. You've made a grave mistake. You think this is about a house. It's about order, respect, consequences. You'll learn that soon enough. Then silence. I deleted it. But not before saving a copy. The trial was set for 1 week later. Fast-tracked, thanks to the arson unit's pressure and the media attention. Local news had dubbed her the Lilac Arsonist. I spent the days preparing, reviewing testimony, walking Max through the courthouse park, trying not to imagine her walking free. Then, the morning of sentencing, I arrived early. The courtroom was half full. Neighbors, reporters, a few curious HOA members who'd once nodded along with Eleanor's edicts. She entered in a tailored navy suit, hair perfect, posture regal. She didn't look at me, but when the judge read the charges and asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she turned, slowly, deliberately, and smiled. Not at the judge, at me, like she already knew something I didn't. The courtroom air was thick with the hum of fluorescent lights and the rustle of nervous whispers. I sat in the front row, Max curled at my feet under the bench, his warm weight the only thing keeping me grounded. Eleanor stood at the defense table, hands clasped, eyes downcast, performing remorse like it was another HOA-approved landscaping choice. "Ms. Whitmore," the judge said, peering over his glasses. "You've been found guilty of first-degree arson and criminal intimidation. The recommended sentence is 12 to 15 years. A murmur rippled through the room. Then Eleanor lifted her chin. "Your Honor," she said, voice clear and calm, "before you sentence me, there's something you should know." She turned to her attorney, who handed her a manila envelope. She didn't open it, just held it up like a relic. "I filed a motion this morning," she said. "Exhibit A contains evidence that Mr. Mercer, the victim, was not only behind on his mortgage, but had taken out a $750,000 fire insurance policy 3 weeks before the incident. A policy with no named beneficiaries, except himself." My stomach dropped. "That's a lie," I said, standing. "I never—" "Sit down, Mr. Mercer," the judge warned. But the damage was done. Heads turned, eyebrows raised. Even the prosecutor looked uneasy. Eleanor's smile was microscopic, but I saw it. The flicker of triumph. She hadn't just set a fire. She'd built a narrative. And now, in this sterile room with its wooden benches and echoing acoustics, she was rewriting me as the villain. The judge called a recess. Outside, reporters swarmed. "Mr. Mercer, did you stage the fire for insurance? Is it true you threatened Ms. Whitmore first?" I pushed through them, Max tugging at the leash, heart hammering. Back in my motel room, I pulled up my bank records, my insurance documents, everything. Nothing matched her claims, no new policy, no sudden deposits. But then I saw it. A forged document, filed under my name with the county clerk's office. Fake signature, fake notary stamp, dated October 3rd. The same day I'd been arguing with the contractor about rebuilding my porch. She'd been watching, planning, and now with one envelope she'd turned my truth into doubt. When court reconvened, the judge announced a delay. "New evidence requires review. Sentencing postponed pending investigation." Eleanor walked out free, again. And as she passed me in the hallway, she leaned in. Just enough for me to smell her lilac perfume. "Rules," she whispered, "are only as strong as the people who enforce them." Then she was gone, leaving me standing in the courthouse corridor, wondering if justice in Oak Hollow had ever been about law, or just who held the lighter. 2 days after the sentencing delay, I sat on the edge of my motel bed, staring at the forged insurance document printed out in blurry ink. It was good. Scarily good. Same font as my bank statements, same notary seal used in our county. Whoever made it knew how to mimic bureaucracy like a forger knows brushstrokes. And there was only one person in Oak Hollow who'd spent years studying every comma in our legal covenants. Eleanor Whitmore. But I needed proof it was her, not just suspicion. That's when Mrs. Gable knocked on my door. Agnes Gable, 82, widowed, lived 3 houses down from my old place. She'd once brought me zucchini bread after my divorce and told me, "Men like you don't burn houses, Daniel. They plant gardens." Now she stood in the hallway, trembling slightly, clutching a plastic grocery bag like it held contraband. "Can I come in?" she whispered. I ushered her inside. She wouldn't sit. Just paced, eyes darting to the window. "I saw her," she said finally. "The night of the fire." My breath stopped. "You saw Eleanor?" "No, not her, but her car, parked down the street near the old Miller place. Abandoned, you know. She was there an hour before your smoke alarm went off. I thought nothing of it. Until the fire." "Why didn't you tell the police?" She looked down, ashamed. "She came to my door the next day. Said if I misremembered anything, she'd report my grandson for that underage parking ticket last summer. Said it could escalate." My hands curled into fists. "Agnes, do you still have your security camera footage?" She nodded. "I keep it on a hard drive. Never uploaded it to the cloud. Eleanor made us all disable cloud storage after that privacy breach scare last year." She pulled a small black drive from the grocery bag. "It's all there, License plate, timestamp, her getting out with a red gas can. I took the drive like it was holy water. That night I met Lena at her lab. We plugged it in. The footage was grainy but clear. 9:47 p.m., October 23rd. Eleanor's white Lexus. Her stepping out in a dark raincoat, hood up, carrying a red jerry can labeled Premium Fuel. She walked toward my street. The timestamp cut off at 9:52. My fire alarm went off at 10:03. "This is it," Lena said. "This proves premeditation." But as I stared at the screen, something nagged at me. Why would Eleanor, a woman who ironed her grocery lists, be so careless as to be caught on camera? Unless she wanted to be seen. Just enough to make me think I'd won, while she set something else in motion. I took the footage straight to Chief Ruiz. He watched it 3 times in silence, then leaned back in his creaking office chair, fingers steepled. "This changes everything," he said. "We can refile, push for immediate remand." But something still gnawed at me. "Why would she leave this trail?" Ruiz shrugged. "Arrogance. She thought no one would check old Lady Gable's camera. Maybe, but Eleanor didn't make mistakes, not like this. Still, I couldn't ignore the evidence." The DA agreed to refile, and a new hearing was set for Friday. Just 3 days away. I spent the next 48 hours preparing, rehearsing my testimony, reviewing timelines, even practicing how to say I saw her car without my voice cracking. Then Thursday night my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text. "You're walking into a room full of mirrors, Daniel. Don't believe what you see." No signature, but I knew. I called Agnes. No answer. I drove to her house. Her lights were off, her car gone. Panic prickled my neck. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse early. Too early. The halls were empty except for a janitor mopping near room 3B. Then I saw her. Agnes, sitting in the witness waiting area, pale as paper, eyes red-rimmed. "Agnes," I said, crouching beside her. "Are you okay?" She wouldn't meet my gaze. "I'm sorry, Daniel." "Sorry for what?" Before she could answer, the bailiff called her name. In the courtroom, she took the stand, swore in, and then, without prompting, said, "Your Honor, I'd like to recant my previous statement." My blood turned to slush. "I was mistaken," she continued, voice thin. "The footage. It wasn't Ms. Whitmore. It was a look-alike. Or maybe I misremembered the date." The prosecutor tried to press her. "Mrs. Gable, you gave this drive to Mr. Mercer yourself." "I was confused," she whispered. "Grief. Age. I don't trust my eyes anymore." Eleanor sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. But her lips, just for a second, curled. After court, I cornered Agnes in the parking lot. "What did she do to you?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "She didn't do anything to me, Daniel. She went after my grandson. Said he'd violated HOA rules by parking his friend's motorcycle in the driveway. Filed a complaint with the city. They're threatening to impound it and fine him $5,000. He can't afford that. He'll lose his job." She gripped my arm. "She told me if I stuck to my story, they'd charge him with illegal vehicle modification. Said they had photos." I stared at her, heart breaking. Eleanor hadn't just burned my house. She'd weaponized the entire system, down to a grandmother's love for her grandson. And now, with Agnes's recantation, the footage was just a file on a drive. No witness. No corroboration. Back in my car, I opened the glove compartment and pulled out the lighter I'd found at the clubhouse. The one with EW engraved on it. I'd kept it as a reminder. Now I wondered if it was bait, because if she'd planted the glove, the lilac bottle, maybe even the camera footage, what else had she left for me to find? I sat in my car for an hour after Agnes left, the lighter cold in my palm. It was too perfect. Too convenient. Found right after she threatened me, sitting on a table like a prop in a courtroom drama. And now, with Agnes recanting, it was all I had left. This tiny piece of silver metal that could either be my salvation or my undoing. I called Lena again. "Can you test this for fingerprints and accelerant residue?" "Already did," she said. "Last week, remember?" "No, I mean, really, test it. Not just surface swabs. Check the hinge, the fuel chamber, see if it's been used recently, or if it's been planted." There was a pause. "You think she gave it to you on purpose?" "I think Eleanor Whitmore doesn't leave evidence behind," I said. "She leaves traps." Lena agreed to run a deep forensic analysis. 2 days later, she called, voice tight. "Daniel, this lighter hasn't been used in over a year. No gasoline residue. No soot. But here's the kicker. The engraving? It's machine cut, yes, but the initials EW were added after the original manufacturing. with a hobbyist laser engraver, the kind sold at craft stores. My pulse quickened. And, she said. I cross-referenced purchase records. One was bought at Oak Hollow Crafts last September, under the name Agnes Gable. I froze. Agnes? But that didn't make sense unless Eleanor had used Agnes's name to buy it. Maybe even stolen her HOA discount card. Agnes had mentioned once that Eleanor borrowed her card to get senior pricing on mulch. I drove to Agnes's house again. This time I didn't knock. I waited. At dusk, her grandson's beat-up pickup pulled into the driveway. He got out, shoulders slumped, and trudged inside. 10 minutes later, Agnes came out holding a small package. She walked to her mailbox, opened it, and placed the package inside. I waited until she went back in, then approached. The package was addressed to Eleanor Whitmore. Return label. Agnes Gable. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a second lighter. Identical. Also engraved, E.W. My hands shook as I stared at it. Eleanor hadn't just framed me. She'd manipulated Agnes into helping her frame me. By making her feel complicit, guilty, useful. And now, if I presented either lighter as evidence, it would look like I was planting them. Or that Agnes was lying for me. Either way, my credibility would crumble. I stood there in the fading light, the two lighters in my hands like twin lies, and realized the horrifying truth. Eleanor wasn't just trying to avoid prison. She was trying to make sure I never got justice, even if she went down with me. But then I remembered something small. The night of the fire, as I ran from my burning house, I dropped my phone near the driveway. It melted in the heat, but the SIM card, I'd kept it. Because sometimes, the truth isn't in what's left behind. It's in what's erased. The SIM card sat in a Ziploc bag in my desk drawer, warped at the edges, blackened like a relic from Pompeii. I'd kept it out of habit. Sentimental, maybe. Or just stubborn. But now, it felt like my last lifeline. I took it to a data recovery specialist downtown, a guy named Rico who worked out of a back room behind a pawn shop and charged in cash. "You're lucky," he said, squinting at the card under a magnifying lamp. "The memory chip's intact. We might get something." 2 days later, he called. Got 17 seconds of call log data, one outgoing call. Dialed at 9:58 p.m. on October 23rd. My breath caught. "To who?" "Blocked number. But..." He paused. "The carrier ID matches a prepaid line registered to a shell corporation. And that corporation? It's tied to an address." "Let me guess," I said. "Oak Hollow. Bingo. 412 Sycamore Lane. Eleanor's house." I showed the report to Chief Ruiz. His jaw tightened. "A call from your phone to her number. 8 minutes before the fire alarm went off? That's not just circumstantial. That's a timeline." "But I didn't make that call," I said. "Doesn't matter. She did. She must have grabbed your phone when you dropped it, dialed her own burner and hung up, just long enough to leave a digital breadcrumb pointing to you. It was brilliant. Twisted but brilliant. She'd staged a call log to suggest I'd contacted her right before the fire. Maybe to argue, maybe to confess. And if I'd died in the blaze? The call would have looked like a final, desperate message. But I hadn't died. And now that same call could prove she'd been at the scene. Because why would my phone call her? Unless she was standing right there. We subpoenaed the cell tower logs. The data showed my phone and Eleanor's burner pinged the same tower within 200 feet of each other at 9:58 p.m. The DA moved fast. Filed a motion to overturn Agnes's recantation as coerced. Reintroduced the security footage. Added the call log as evidence of presence and intent. Eleanor's lawyer fought back hard. But for the first time, the judge looked skeptical. At the emergency hearing, the prosecutor played the tower data alongside the camera footage. "She was there," he said. "She took his phone. She made that call to create a false narrative. And then she walked away while his home burned." Eleanor didn't flinch, but her knuckles were white around her pen. Then, as the judge prepared to rule, she stood. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "I'd like to enter a change of plea." Silence fell like a guillotine. "Guilty," she said, "to all charges." Gasps filled the room. I stared at her, stunned. Why now? Then I saw it, the faintest smirk as she glanced at me. She wasn't surrendering. She was controlling the ending. The courtroom fell so quiet I could hear Max's collar jingle as he shifted at my feet. Eleanor stood perfectly still, hands clasped, face serene, as if she'd just volunteered to chair the next HOA garden committee, not admitted to burning down a man's home. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Whitmore, are you certain? You understand the consequences of this plea?" "I do, Your Honor," she said. "I acted out of a misguided sense of duty. I believed Mr. Mercer's disregard for community standards endangered us all. I lost my way. Her voice cracked. Just enough. A single tear traced her cheek. The performance was Oscar-worthy. The prosecutor looked wary but nodded. A guilty plea meant no appeal, no drawn-out trial. Closure. But I knew better. This wasn't remorse, it was strategy. By pleading guilty, she avoided cross-examination. Avoided having to explain the forged insurance docs, the planted lighters, the threats to Agnes's grandson. She'd take her sentence, serve a fraction of it, and walk away with her story intact. She snapped under pressure, poor, overworked HOA president. The judge scheduled sentencing for 1 week later. Outside, reporters shouted questions. "Do you forgive her, Mr. Mercer? Will you sue the HOA?" I didn't answer, just walked to my car, Max trotting beside me. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about her plea felt off. Too clean. Too controlled. Then it hit me. She'd never once said, "I set the fire." She said she acted out of a misguided sense of duty. Vague. Ambiguous. Legally, it satisfied the plea. But in the court of public opinion, it left room for doubt. And doubt was her weapon. I called Ruiz. What if she's planning to appeal after sentencing? Claim ineffective counsel or mental duress? Possible, he admitted. But unlikely. She waived her rights. Unless, I said slowly, she's not planning to appeal the conviction, but the narrative. The next day, I dug into her past, public records, old HOA minutes, even her gardening club newsletters, and there it was, buried in a 2019 meeting transcript. Motion carried. E. Whitmore, authorized to manage emergency property interventions per Section 12, subsection D. Section 12, subsection D. The nuisance abatement clause. It allowed the HOA president to take reasonable action to eliminate hazards, including, in extreme cases, controlled removal of structures. It had never been used. Until now. Eleanor wasn't just pleading guilty to arson. She was laying the groundwork to claim she'd acted under HOA authority, that she'd believed, however wrongly, that burning my house was a reasonable action to preserve community standards. And if that narrative stuck, she wouldn't just get a lighter sentence. She'd become a martyr for HOA overreach reform, while I remained the reckless homeowner who forced her hand. I stared at the transcript, cold dread pooling in my gut. She hadn't surrendered. She'd just changed battlefields. I spent the next 3 days buried in legal archives, cross-referencing Oak Hollow's covenants with state property law. Section 12, subsection D was real, tucked into a 2017 amendment no one had ever questioned. It read, "In cases of imminent aesthetic or structural hazard posing risk to community value, the HOA president may authorize immediate remediation, including demolition, upon 48-hour notice or emergency waiver." Imminent aesthetic hazard. They'd used that phrase once before, back in 2020, when they forced old Mr. Hendricks to paint his faded blue shutters white. But demolition? Burning a house to the ground? It was absurd, unconstitutional, probably illegal. But in court, absurdity doesn't matter if it's written down. I called a civil rights attorney I knew from my divorce case. "Can they really use this to justify arson?" "Not legally," she said. But if her lawyer frames it as a good faith belief in her authority, a jury might buy it, especially in a town like Oak Hollow where the HOA runs everything. That's when I realized Eleanor wasn't just defending herself. She was testing the limits of the system she'd spent years shaping. And if she won, even partially, it would set a precedent. I couldn't let that happen. So I did the one thing she never expected. I called a meeting. Not with lawyers, not with the police, with my neighbors. 30 of them showed up at the community park. People I hadn't spoken to in years. Folks who'd voted for Eleanor's zero-tolerance landscaping policy. Even a few who'd filed complaints against me for my overgrown lilacs. I didn't accuse, didn't rant. I just told the truth. "I lost my home," I said, voice steady. "But what scares me more is that the rules meant to protect us can be twisted to destroy us. And if we let her walk away saying she did it for the community, none of us are safe." Silence. Then slowly, hands raised. "Mrs. Chen." She fined me $200 because my wind chimes were sonically disruptive. Jamal from 42B. She had my son's skateboard confiscated for unauthorized recreational equipment on common pathways. One by one, they shared their stories, not of crimes, but of quiet humiliations, of living under a regime of perfect lawns and perfect fear. By the end of the night, we had a plan. We'd file a class action petition to dissolve the Oak Hollow HOA's enforcement powers, and we'd submit it to the court before sentencing. Because justice wasn't just about locking Eleanor up. It was about making sure no one could ever do this again. But as I walked home that night, phone buzzing in my pocket, I saw a new message from an unknown number. You think neighbors will save you? They'll abandon you the moment it costs them their mailbox paint. I deleted it, but I couldn't shake the chill, because deep down I wondered, would they really stand with me? Or would they choose the illusion of order over the mess of truth? By dawn, we had 63 signatures. By noon, 112. By the time I walked into the courthouse on sentencing day, clutching a 3-inch binder labeled, Petition for HOA Governance Review, Oak Hollow Estates. Nearly every homeowner in the subdivision had signed. Even Agnes, her hand trembling but firm, added her name last. The courtroom buzzed like a beehive poked with a stick. Reporters scribbled furiously. Neighbors whispered in clusters. And at the defense table, Eleanor sat perfectly still. Though for the first time, her posture wasn't regal. It was rigid. Her lawyer tried to dismiss the petition as irrelevant emotional theater, but the judge didn't agree. Given the defendant's stated motive, he said, adjusting his glasses, the court will accept this petition as contextual evidence of systemic overreach. Eleanor's mask slipped, just for a heartbeat. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp with something I hadn't seen before. Panic. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the entire foundation she'd built her power on. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the state recommends 14 years, but in light of new evidence, including the defendant's manipulation of HOA bylaws to justify criminal acts, we urge the maximum sentence, 20 years, with no parole eligibility for 15. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium, Max at my heels. I didn't look at Eleanor. I looked at the judge. I'm not here to ask for vengeance, I said. I'm here to ask for clarity. Because if we say it's okay for someone to burn down a home because they didn't like the shrubs, then none of us truly own our lives. We just rent them. From people like her. I paused. She didn't just destroy my house. She made us all afraid to be imperfect. To be human. Silence, heavy, sacred. Then from the back row, someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole room rose. Not in chaos, but in quiet solidarity. Eleanor didn't move. But her hands, folded in her lap, were clenched so tight her knuckles turned white. The judge cleared his throat. Ms. Whitmore, do you have anything to say before sentencing? She stood slowly, turned to face the room, and for the first time she didn't speak to the judge. She spoke to me. Rules exist, she said, voice low but clear. Because people like you refuse to govern yourselves. Then she smiled, thin, bitter, final, and in that smile I saw it. She still believed she was right. The judge sentenced her to 18 years, but as the bailiffs led her away, she turned one last time, and mouthed 2 words, not over. 3 weeks after sentencing, I got a manila envelope with no return address, just my name, typed in crisp, impersonal font. Inside, a single sheet of prison-issued paper. Daniel. It began, in Eleanor's unmistakable cursive, tight, precise, every loop deliberate. I write not to apologize, but to clarify. You believe you've won. You've rallied your neighbors, dismantled my authority, and locked me away. But you misunderstand the nature of order. It doesn't vanish because one steward falls. It evolves. It finds new hands. You think the HOA is gone? It's being rewritten. By people who learned from my mistakes. They'll be kinder, smoother, and far more effective. Enjoy your victory. It will be brief. E.W. I read it 3 times, then tossed it in the shredder. But it stayed with me. Because she was right about one thing. The HOA wasn't dead. The county had already appointed an interim board. Neutral parties, they called them. But at the first public meeting, I recognized 2 of them. Linda Cho, who'd once reported me for unapproved bird feeder placement, and Greg Mallory, who'd argued that children's bikes shouldn't be left on driveways after 6 p.m. They smiled when they saw me, polite, professional, and utterly chilling. Still, life moved forward. I'd found a small rental on the edge of town. Max had stopped barking at fire trucks, and the lilac bush I'd replanted in my new backyard, just a sapling, was starting to bloom. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, I got a call from Chief Ruiz. "We found something," he said. "In Eleanor's storage unit, behind a false wall." I met him at the evidence locker. Inside a locked metal case, 3 more lighters, each engraved with different initials, a stack of forged documents targeting other homeowners, and a ledger. Page after page of names, violations, and notes like Hendricks, resistant, needs pressure. Chen, vulnerable via daughter's college fund. Mercer, defiant, final solution required. But the last entry stopped me cold. Gable, compliant, useful. Beneath it, a date, October 24th. The day after my house burned. She was already planning her next move, Ruiz said quietly. Even as the flames were dying, I stared at the ledger, nausea rising. Eleanor hadn't just targeted me. I was just the first. And if she'd had more time, I closed the case. But as I walked out into the rain, I realized something worse. She didn't need more time, because the system she built was still standing, just wearing a friendlier face. The first HOA meeting under the reformed board was held in the same clubhouse where Eleanor once cornered me. Same folding chairs, same projector screen, even the same faint smell of lemon disinfectant and suppressed rage. Linda Cho stood at the front, smiling warmly. "We're here to listen," she said. "To rebuild trust. To serve, not control." She announced relaxed rules. No more fines for flower height, no more mandatory shutter colors. Applause rippled through the room. People looked hopeful, relieved. I stayed silent, because I saw what they didn't. The new bylaws, printed on glossy paper and handed out like peace treaties, had a new clause buried on page 12. The HOA reserves the right to initiate community wellness reviews for properties exhibiting signs of neglect, instability, or non-compliance with evolving aesthetic standards. Evolving aesthetic standards. Same poison, new bottle. After the meeting, Linda approached me. "Daniel, we'd love your input. You've been through so much. You understand what real reform looks like." Her smile was kind. Her eyes were calculating. "I'm just trying to live quietly," I said. "Of course," she said, touching my arm. "But silence can be misinterpreted as disengagement, or worse, resentment." The threat was velvet-wrapped, but it was there. That night, I checked my mailbox. A new HOA newsletter. On the back, handwritten in neat script, "Your lilac is blooming beautifully. Such a shame if something happened to it." No signature. But I knew. They weren't just continuing Eleanor's work. They were honoring it. And I was still on their list. I called Ruiz. "They're using her playbook. Without the arson, hopefully," he said grimly. "Maybe," I said. "But fear doesn't always need fire. Sometimes a note is enough." I thought about moving, leaving Oak Hollow behind for good. But then I looked out my window, at my lilac, small but defiant, petals catching the morning light. And I realized if I ran, they'd win. Not just over me. Over everyone who'd signed that petition. Over Agnes. Over the neighbors who'd finally found their voices. So I did something unexpected. I signed up to run for the HOA board. Not to take it over, but to dismantle it from the inside. Because if order was inevitable, then justice had to be too. I filed my candidacy 3 days before the deadline. The reaction was mixed. Some neighbors clapped me on the back. Finally, someone who'll keep them honest. Others avoided eye contact. One woman actually crossed the street when she saw me walking Max. Linda called it a bold choice at the next board meeting. Her tone sugary, her smile tight. "We welcome diverse perspectives," she said, "as long as they align with community harmony." Translation: fall in line or be removed. But I wasn't running to win. I was running to expose. My campaign platform was simple, full transparency. I posted every HOA expense online, shared meeting minutes in real time, even live-streamed budget discussions from my phone. At first, people tuned in out of curiosity. Then they stayed out of outrage, because the numbers didn't lie. $12,000 for landscaping consultants, a firm owned by Linda's cousin. $8,500 for security enhancements. CCTV cameras pointed only at problem homes, mine included. $3,200 for community morale events, a private wine tasting at Linda's house. I presented the receipts at the next town hall. Silence, then murmurs, then a slow building wave of anger. Linda tried to pivot. "These are standard operational costs, you're twisting context." But the damage was done. 2 board members resigned within a week. Then came the anonymous tip. A USB drive left in my mailbox. On it, audio files. Linda's voice, clear as ice. "If Mercer wins, we lose control. Find something on him. His dog's license? His rental agreement? Doesn't matter. Just make him look unstable." Another file. Agnes Gable's grandson. Dig into his work history. See if he's using a company truck for personal errands. We can report him to corporate. They were still playing Eleanor's game, just with better PR. I played the recordings at the final pre-election meeting. No one clapped. No one spoke. They just stared at Linda like she'd grown fangs. She denied it, of course. Called it deepfake audio. But the doubt had taken root. Election day arrived. I didn't win, but I didn't need to. Because the new board? It included Agnes Gable, and Jamal from 42B, and Mrs. Chen, 3 ordinary neighbors who'd lived under fear for years. and finally decided to plant something new in its place. As I walked home that night, I passed Eleanor's old house, now vacant, windows dark. But in the front yard, someone had planted a single lilac bush. Not 18 inches, not 22, just free. The first board meeting with the new HOA leadership felt like stepping into a different dimension. No gavel. No stern warnings about aesthetic violations. Just folding chairs arranged in a circle, coffee in mismatched mugs, and Jamal setting up a Bluetooth speaker to play soft jazz. To ease the tension, he said with a grin. Agnes opened the meeting by reading a quote from her late husband. "A neighborhood isn't built with rules. It's built with trust." Then she looked at me. "Daniel, you've been through hell. What should we change first?" I didn't hesitate. "Repeal Section 12, subsection D, the nuisance abatement clause. Burn it, delete it, erase it from every copy." Mrs. Chen nodded. "And while we're at it, no more evolving aesthetic standards. If it's not in writing on day one, it doesn't exist." We voted unanimously. Then came the hard part, accountability. We reviewed every fine issued in the past 5 years, over 300. We refunded them, all of them. Even the $25 one I got for unapproved wind chime tone. People cried, not from sadness, from relief. But as we wrapped up, Agnes pulled me aside. "There's something else," she whispered. She handed me a file. Inside photos. Not of me, of Eleanor's old storage unit. After the police cleared it, someone had gone back and taken the ledger. "The night before the election," Agnes said, voice low. "Security cam at the evidence annex caught a figure in a hoodie. Can't see the face, but they drove a white Lexus." My blood ran cold. Eleanor was in prison. But her car? Her lawyer had it, or maybe someone else. I showed the photos to Ruiz. He frowned. "We sealed that unit. Only court personnel had access. Or someone with a key," I said. "Because if that ledger was out there, with all those names, all those plans, then Eleanor's war wasn't over. It had just gone underground. And the next target might not be a house. It might be a life." The ledger wasn't just a list. It was a blueprint for psychological warfare. Names, vulnerabilities, leverage points. In the wrong hands, it could ruin lives without ever lighting a match. I spent days retracing every person named in it. Mr. Hendricks, now in assisted living. The Chen family, who just refinanced their home. Jamal's younger sister, applying for nursing school. Were they being watched? Pressured? Then a break. Ruiz called at 2 a.m. "We got a hit on the Lexus. It's registered to a Shell LLC, but the lease payments come from a private account linked to Eleanor's divorce attorney, Richard Voss. Smooth-talking, silver-haired. The man who'd argued Eleanor was a public servant pushed too far. I'd seen him at the sentencing, nodding solemnly as she was led away. Now it looked like he'd been cleaning up her messes. Permanently. I tailed him for 2 days. Watched him drop off dry cleaning, pick up espresso, visit his office in the financial district. Nothing suspicious. Until Thursday. He drove to a self-storage facility on the edge of town. Unit 314. I waited until he left, then called in a favor from a former firefighter who worked security there. "Just need to know what's inside," I said. He texted back an hour later. "Boxes, files, and a locked fireproof safe. Smells like lilac air freshener." My stomach twisted. Eleanor's signature, even in hiding. That night, with Ruiz's quiet blessing, we got a warrant. Inside the unit, the original ledger, now annotated in fresh ink. New names, new notes. Mercer, running for board, neutralize. Gable, grandson promoted, leverage increased. Chen, daughter accepted to NYU, tuition, vulnerability. And at the bottom, in Voss's handwriting, Phase 2 begins after election. No fire this time, just silence. They weren't planning arson. They were planning erasure. Reputation, finances, futures, all from the shadows. I stared at the page, cold fury rising. Eleanor might be behind bars, but her ideology had found a new vessel. And Voss wasn't just her lawyer, he was her successor. We moved fast. With the new evidence, Ruiz got a warrant for Voss's office, his home, even his cloud backups. What we found was worse than I imagined. Not just digital copies of the ledger, but recordings. Dozens of them. Voss, on the phone with a prison payphone number, Eleanor's, discussing strategic realignments. "The Chen girl's scholarship can be challenged on residency grounds," he said coolly. "One anonymous tip to the university is all it takes." "And Mercer?" Eleanor's voice tinny but sharp. "He thinks he's won. He's a nuisance," Voss replied. "But nuisances can be redirected. I've already contacted his landlord about unverified subletting. If he's evicted before the board certifies his term, He's disqualified. I listened, fists clenched, as they dissected my life like it was a spreadsheet. But the final recording stopped me cold. What if they find the storage unit? Voss asked. Then let them, Eleanor said. The real ledger isn't paper, Richard. It's in their heads. They're already afraid. All you have to do is whisper. That's when I understood. The physical ledger was a decoy, a trail to follow while the real weapon, the culture of fear, kept spreading silently. But we had enough. The DA charged Voss with conspiracy, witness tampering, and aiding a convicted felon. His law license was suspended within 48 hours. At his arraignment, he didn't look at me. But as he was led away in cuffs, he muttered just loud enough for me to hear. You think this changes anything? The HOA will always need someone to keep the weeds trimmed. I didn't respond, because I finally saw the truth. It was never about one person. Not Eleanor, not Voss. It was about a system that rewarded control and punished humanity. And the only way to kill it was to replace it with something louder, something kinder, something that couldn't be whispered away. So I called a neighborhood meeting, not in the clubhouse, but in the park, under open sky, and I brought the ledger, not to hide it, but to burn it. We gathered at dusk in Oak Hollow Park, the same patch of grass where I'd first rallied my neighbors. This time, there were more of us. Kids played near the swings. Someone brought a guitar. The air smelled of rain and damp earth, not lilacs or smoke. I stood by a small stone fire pit, the kind the old HOA would have banned for unapproved open-flame devices. In my hands, the ledger. Not just Voss's copy. Every version I could find, printed, photocopied, even a digital backup on a USB drive. Agnes stepped forward first. Do it, she said softly. I didn't give a speech. Didn't need to. I just lit a match. The pages curled black at the edges, then burst into orange flame. Names turned to ash. Plans dissolved. Leverage vanished into the night sky. Someone started clapping, then cheering. Not wildly, quietly, reverently, like we were witnessing a funeral and a birth at once. As the last ember died, Mrs. Chen placed a small potted lilac beside the fire pit. For your old one, she said. Jamal added a smooth river stone. For every rule they used to hurt us. One by one, neighbors left tokens. A child's drawing of a house with a rainbow roof, a key from a find mailbox, a single white rose. We weren't just burying fear. We were planting something new in its place. But as I turned to leave, Ruiz pulled me aside. Prison just called, he said. Eleanor requested a meeting. With you. I froze. Why? She says she has information. About Voss. About others like him. And she says she wants to make amends. I almost laughed. Eleanor Whitmore didn't do amends. She did calculations. But then I thought of the ledger burning. Of the neighbors standing together. Of the lilac blooming in my yard. Maybe she was trying to manipulate me one last time. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd finally seen what her order had cost. I looked at Ruiz. Set it up. Because if there was even a 1% chance she'd help dismantle the network she built, I had to take it. Even if it burned me all over again. Visiting hours at Blackwood. Correctional were fluorescent lit and smelled of bleach and stale coffee. I sat in a plastic chair, hands on my knees, facing a thick pane of glass. Eleanor appeared 5 minutes late, escorted in a faded orange jumpsuit, hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked smaller, older, but her eyes, still sharp, still watching. She picked up the phone on her side. I did the same. You came, she said. Not a question. A statement. I came, I replied. You said you had information. She studied me for a long moment. You burned the ledger. Yeah. A foolish gesture. Symbolic. Meaningless. Felt pretty meaningful to my neighbors. A flicker, something almost like regret, crossed her face. I didn't set out to hurt you, Daniel. Just to control me. She didn't deny it. Control isn't evil. Chaos is. I saw what happens when people do whatever they want. Lawns rot. Fences sag, values erode. I was trying to preserve something. You preserved your own power. She looked down. Maybe. Then quieter. Voss was never mine. He used me. Used my name, my reputation to build his own network. There are others like him. In other towns. Other states. They call themselves community stewards. My pulse quickened. How many? Dozens, maybe hundreds. They share tactics, templates, even enforcement protocols. Like arson? Her silence was answer enough. They're watching Oak Hollow now, she said. Seeing how you defeated me. They'll learn, adapt, be quieter next time. Why tell me this? She met my eyes. Because you're the only one who understands what's really at stake. Not houses. Not rules. Dignity. I almost laughed. You don't get to say that word. Maybe not, she said. But I can still help stop them. She slid a folded piece of paper under the glass partition. Names, contacts, a server address in Nevada. It's everything I overheard from Voss during our calls. I didn't touch it. Why now? Because, she said, voice cracking just once, I finally saw your lilac bush. On the news. After the fire. It was still standing. Just scorched. But alive. She looked away. I thought I was pruning chaos. But maybe I was just killing beauty. I took the paper. And for the first time, I believed her. Not because she'd changed, but because even the coldest hearts can thaw when faced with the thing they tried to destroy and failed. The paper Eleanor gave me contained a single IP address, a username, and a password scrawled in shaky handwriting. Steward 73, Oak Hollow 2023. It felt too easy, too clean, but Ruiz didn't hesitate. He looped in the FBI's cybercrime unit. Within 24 hours, they confirmed it. The server was real. A private cloud repository hosted in a data center outside Reno. And it wasn't just a backup. It was a hub. Inside, encrypted chat logs, training manuals titled Non-Lethal Compliance Strategies, and a directory labeled Active Stewards, Q4, 2025. Over 200 names, from Arizona to Maine. HOA presidents, property managers, even a few city zoning officers, all sharing tactics, how to exploit rental loopholes, weaponize noise ordinances, pressure vulnerable homeowners into selling. One file stood out. Phase 3, Silent Acquisition. It outlined a plan to buy up distressed properties in non-compliant neighborhoods using shell companies, then flip them to investors who'd enforce aesthetic purity by design. Oak Hollow was listed as a test case, and my house, marked as successfully neutralized, model for future interventions. I sat in Ruiz's office, staring at the screen, nausea rising. This wasn't just about control. It was about profit, and we'd been the blueprint. The FBI moved fast. Raids were planned across 6 states. Arrests would follow. But they needed one thing. A public whistleblower. Someone with first-hand experience who could testify before Congress about how community standards were being weaponized nationwide. They asked me. I said yes. Not for revenge, but because if my burned house could stop this from happening to someone else's, then maybe the ashes meant something after all. I flew to D.C. 2 weeks later. As I walked into the Capitol hearing room, I passed a protester holding a sign. HOAs, where democracy goes to die. I almost smiled, because for the first time, I wasn't just a victim. I was a witness. And witnesses don't burn. They speak. The hearing room was colder than I expected. Marble floors, high ceilings, and rows of stern-faced lawmakers who'd probably never been fined for a crooked mailbox flag. I sat at the witness table, hands folded, Max's old collar looped around my wrist like a talisman. Senator Reyes, chair of the Housing Oversight Committee, leaned forward. Mr. Mercer, you allege that your homeowners association didn't just harass you, but conspired to destroy your home as part of a broader national network? Yes, ma'am, I said, and not just mine. I told them everything. The lilacs, the lighter, the forged insurance, the ledger, Eleanor's plea, Voss's recordings, the server in Nevada. I didn't raise my voice, didn't cry, just spoke, calm, clear, like I was explaining why my garden needed watering. But when I described standing in the rain, watching my house collapse into flame while Eleanor watched from her car, a hush fell over the room so deep I could hear the clock ticking above the door. Then I played the audio, Eleanor's voice from prison. I thought I was pruning chaos, but maybe I was just killing beauty. A Republican senator wiped his eye. Afterward, reporters swarmed. National news picked it up. By evening, HOA abuse was trending. Homeowners from Florida to Oregon shared their stories. Forced paint colors, confiscated trampolines, elderly neighbors driven out by fines they couldn't pay. But the real victory came 3 days later. The Department of Justice announced a federal investigation into systemic HOA overreach and coercive governance practices. And Congress introduced the Homeowner Protection and Autonomy Act, banning private entities from wielding quasi-governmental enforcement powers, requiring transparency in fines, and outlawing aesthetic-based evictions. I stood on the Capitol steps that day, wind in my face, and finally felt it. Not justice, but hope. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You think laws will stop us? We'll just rename ourselves. Neighborhood integrity councils. Community harmony boards. The game changes. The players don't. I stared at the message. Then I typed back, good, because now we know what to look for. And I hit send. 6 months after the fire, I stood in the shell of my rebuilt home. Not the same house. Never that. But something new. Stronger. Built with reclaimed wood from the old porch, solar panels on the roof, and a wide front window that faced the street, uncurtained. No hiding, no fear. And in the yard, 3 lilac bushes. One for me, one for Max, one for Agnes, who'd passed peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks earlier, her grandson holding her hand. The new HOA, the real one, had waived all permit fees. Neighbors showed up with tools, paintbrushes, casseroles. Jamal built the fence. Mrs. Chen planted herbs along the walkway. Even kids from the block left handprint tiles in the patio concrete. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I'd turned down book deals, TV interviews, even a Netflix docuseries. Not because I didn't want to share the story, but because I refused to let it become entertainment. This wasn't drama. It was a warning, and a blueprint for resistance. Then, one rainy afternoon, a plain envelope arrived. No return address, just my name. Inside, a single photo. Eleanor, in prison blues, standing in the yard during rec time. She wasn't smiling, but she was holding a small potted plant, a lilac sapling, barely 6 inches tall. On the back, in her handwriting, "They let us garden now. I chose lilacs, for symmetry." I didn't know if it was an apology, a peace offering, or just another calculated gesture. But I framed the photo, not to honor her, but to remember. Even the hardest ground can grow something beautiful, if you stop trying to control how it blooms. That night, I sat on my new porch, Max at my feet, watching fireflies blink over the lawn. No sirens, no notes, no white Lexus creeping past. Just quiet, just home. And for the first time in years, peace. A year to the day after my house burned, I received one final letter. This one came through official prison mail, stamped, logged, and screened. No mystery, no hidden threats. Just a single sheet of lined paper, folded neatly, addressed in Eleanor's precise hand. I opened it on my porch, morning coffee steaming beside me, the lilacs in full bloom behind. "Daniel," it read, "I won't ask for forgiveness. Some fires don't leave room for that. But I will say this. You were right. Order without compassion is just tyranny with a rulebook. I spent years believing I was protecting a community, when all I was doing was polishing my own reflection in its windows. They transferred me to a minimum security facility last month. I work in the greenhouse now. We grow vegetables for local food banks. It's quiet, humbling, the kind of work that doesn't need an audience. I heard about the new law, about the families who kept their homes because of your testimony. I hope that gives you more peace than my words ever could. One last thing. Burn this letter. Not because it's dangerous, but because some stories don't need to be kept. They just need to be told. Eleanor! I read it twice, then folded it slowly. Max nudged my hand with his nose, as if sensing the weight. I didn't burn it. Not yet. Because for the first time, her words didn't feel like a weapon or a performance. They felt like a reckoning. And reckonings, even from the worst of us, deserve witness. But I knew what she meant. Some truths aren't meant to be preserved. They're meant to be lived. So I tucked the letter into the back of my gardening journal, between sketches of lilac pruning schedules and notes on soil pH, and closed the cover. Then I stood, stretched, and walked to the edge of my yard. There, where the ashes once fell, daisies now grew wild and bright. No one had planted them. They'd just decided to rise. It's October again. The air smells of wood smoke and fallen leaves, not gasoline and fear. Max is older now, his muzzle gray, his steps slower. But he still trots beside me every morning as I check the garden. The lilacs, they're taller than me. Not 18 inches, not 22. Just free. I never rebuilt the fence Eleanor once cited me for improper height variance. Instead, I left the yard open. Kids from down the street cut through to the bus stop. Mrs. Chen's granddaughter leaves drawings in my mailbox. Sometimes Jamal brings over grilled corn on Sundays. The HOA still exists, but it's different. We vote on every rule. Fines go to a community fund that helps neighbors with repairs. Last month we used it to fix Mr. Hendrix's roof after a storm. No one calls it governance anymore. We just call it being neighbors. I testified again last spring, this time in a federal courtroom, as part of the DOJ's case against the Community Stewards Network. Voss got 10 years. Dozens more are facing charges. The server in Nevada? Wiped clean, then repurposed as a public archive for homeowner rights. Eleanor's up for parole in 3 years. I don't know if I'll speak for or against it. Maybe I'll do neither. Some chapters don't need my voice to close. What I do know is this. They tried to burn me down to teach me a lesson. But fire doesn't just destroy, it clears. And in that scorched earth, something unexpected took root. Not just lilacs, but courage. Community. The quiet, stubborn belief that no one should have to live in fear of their own front yard. I sit on the porch now, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and violet. Max sighs at my feet. Somewhere down the street, a child laughs. No sirens, no notes, no white Lexus. Just peace. Real, earned hours. And as the first stars blink awake above Oak Hollow, I whisper the only words that matter. The lilac still blooms.